Today we're looking at Unit 3, Notes number 7. These are our last set of notes for Unit 3. We'll be discussing the end of World War I. So first, let's look at the aftermath of World War I. Effects in America. The world economy is in ruins, but the U.S. is able to emerge as an economic superpower. So while all the other countries that fought in the war was fought in their country, so they are experiencing a lot more destruction and rebuilding that has to be done after the war. Whereas the U.S. soldiers are coming home, and yes, we had many casualties, but our businesses, our factories, our farms can go on as usual. Plus, during the war, the U.S. was manufacturing, farming, shipping, and that helped to make money for our businesses. So when the war ends, we're in a very good economic position. With the war over, U.S. farms and manufacturers had surpluses because they had been overproducing for the war, that once the war stopped, they didn't need to produce as much, so they had extras. Americans were also beginning to feel a desire to move towards isolationism. So this involvement in the war made them not want to interact too much with foreign powers, made them want to look internally, focus on the U.S. more. So President Wilson sought to secure a lasting peace. Americans wanted to enjoy the victory in the Great War. Which brings us to the peace. So the Paris Peace Conference. So the armistice to end World War I was signed on November 11th, 1918. And so it was signed on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month to commemorate the end of this great war, to give it some significance. And so it's, in many countries, it's still known as Armistice Day, whereas in the U.S., we now refer to it as Veterans Day. So that's why we have the holiday, and it actually falls on November 11th of this year. So you might see on the news some different ceremonies, in Great Britain and France to commemorate Armistice Day. A lot of other countries will wear red poppies for this occasion. President Wilson began his plans for a lasting peace, influenced by his moral diplomacy. Wilson believed that the U.S. should lead the way. In 1919, Wilson travels to Paris for the peace talks at the Palace of Versailles, and there Wilson is greeted as a hero by many Europeans. People see the U.S. as coming in to help them end the war, help put a stop to Germany's aggression. So he's greeted with cheers and parades and, welcome. There's a lot of respect for the American president. This was also the first time an American president had traveled overseas during their presidency. So here's a picture of Wilson walking through the streets, greeted, having a parade. You see they're throwing rose petals on the floor. And so again, just tons of respect, tons of reverence for the president, his position, and also for what America did in terms of helping to end the war. So the Paris Peace Conference. Wilson and the victorious Allied leaders led the talks as the Big Four. So there they are pictured. The Big Four included the U.S., Great Britain, France, and Italy. And so they were the ones kind of leading the way within this conference, kind of navigating what was happening. So opinions varied on how to reach a lasting peace. Some wanted to severely punish Germany for the war and its effects. Some wanted to show leniency to ease the healing process. President Wilson submitted a plan for peace that he designed. He believed the punishment would hurt chances for a lasting peace. His plan focused on cooperation, recovery, and order. And his plan for peace was called the 14 points. So it's not really important for you to know each and every point of the 14 points, but more to understand its overall theme, what it generally wanted to accomplish. And we see that it's gearing more towards democracy, open trade, less imperialism, less countries overseeing one another. So the 14 points can kind of be grouped into certain categories. So the first 4 points dealt with open diplomacy, no secret alliances, freedom of the seas, free trade, and disarmament. So the idea for countries to have less weapons, maybe even scale down their military. And it's again, we'll see that all of the 14 points are very idealistic. In a perfect world, countries wouldn't need militaries, countries don't have to defend themselves. We can talk out conflicts and work them out. And so he really felt that if countries were to not have their military, then we wouldn't have a war. So again, great idea, but would it work in real life? And that's kind of the definition of idealism. You want to create a perfect world, but people aren't perfect. The fifth point proposed a fair voting system on settling conflicts over colonies. And so the idea that certain countries are answering to another country, and so we're getting to the point where we saw with Cuba, people that are being overseen want independence. So he's trying to find a way to allow for that to happen, to allow people to be independent and change the power structure. Point 6 through 13 dealt with the rights of people to decide their own political systems, be able to vote, be independent, advocate for themselves. And then point 14, probably one of the most important points from the 14 points, proposed a League of Nations or Council of Nations to settle future disputes and ensure peace. And so this was Wilson's baby. He really believed in the League of Nations. He thought if this could exist, this organization, this system, we could avoid war. People could come and talk about their problems. We could solve them without having to go to war. And so again, very idealized. What we will see happening is the League of Nations will not become, but the idea leads us to the United Nations, which we still have today. So the Treaty of Versailles. Here are a few pictures from my vacations. My husband and I, we visited Versailles in 2010. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous palace. And so the picture on top is of the actual meeting in the Hall of Mirrors for the Paris Peace Conference. And then picture below is a picture from our tour that we went on while we were there. So the Treaty of Versailles. So the treaty that officially ended World War I. So some of the key provisions. It forced Germany to assume full blame for World War I by signing the War Guilt Clause. Forced Germany to pay $33 billion in reparations. So not only does Germany have to rebuild in their own country, roads, railroad tracks, farms, buildings, factories, but they also have to pay back other countries what they have to build back. So you're basically just crippling them from the start. It forced Germany to disarm to only 100,000 troops, to demilitarize their territories and colonies, and it outlawed the making, importing of arms in Germany. It also included to form the League of Nations and created new democratic nations from loser territories. So we see a lot of these provisions are directly aimed at Germany and bringing them down. So opposition in the U.S. Senate. So Wilson still needed ratification of the Senate to officially approve the treaty. The Senate Republicans strongly opposed the idea of the League of Nations. They feared it would pull the U.S. into further European conflict. So after the war, the U.S. is looking to kind of take a step back, worry about the U.S. They felt that by belonging to a League of Nations, we would create ties to European conflicts and have to get involved anytime something were to come up. So the Senate Republicans were very against this idea of a League of Nations. While Wilson is trying to get this ratified, he suffers a stroke and is unable to compromise with the Republicans. So the U.S. Senate ends up rejecting the treaty because of the League. So that even though it was Wilson's idea, other countries joined the League of Nations, the U.S. never joined the League of Nations. So extra credit. A few slides ago I talked about my trip to Versailles. If you can tell me, come up and tell me what year I visited, I'll give you extra credit to the first 10 people. So here's the last slide. We have comparisons of the map before the war, when the war started, on the top. And so we see Austria-Hungary have this big area here. Then we have the new map. So they're considered one of the losers. So we have new countries: Poland, Czechoslovakia, we have Austria, we have Hungary, we have Yugoslavia, Romania and Bulgaria were already there, so was Albania. So just new countries that are now carved out. And also Eastern Prussia, Lithuania, Latvia, new countries, new map of Europe. So we're done with the notes today. You have time to go back, fill out your key terms, do your summary, work on your review sheet to get ready for the test on Friday.